right, so welcome to this week's episode of Nourishing Tips. If you are in the winter or anywhere, I hope you stay warm. I'm wearing a red scarf today because we're talking about periods. So that's why. So I wanted to talk about periods because there's a lot of things that can happen, and so if you don't have symptoms that correlate with a normal period, then that can be a cause for concern. Like maybe you have to go to the doctor, you got to see someone, that sort of thing. So I just want to point out like what an actual true period is. So if you have any questions about your period or you want to know more about periods, just stay tuned or you can pop them in the comments below. So, if you don't know me, I am Melissa. I am a functional medicine health coach. I work with women with PCOS and also weight loss and period management. So, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So, a period is usually seen as the main event of the menstrual cycle. By the way, if you see my eyes looking back and forth, it's because I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook group at the same time. So the period is usually seen as the main event of the cycle, and that is actually not the case. So ovulation is usually the main event, right? We always talk about periods because usually like our cramps are really bad or like our PMS is really bad, and the whole idea of or the experience of a period is just like not ideal. So we want to first of all make sure that we know that ovulation is the main key event of the menstrual cycle because ovulation is the way you make hormones, estrogen and progesterone, and without ovulation you don't really have a true period. So this is what happens if you're on the birth control pill. When you bleed on the fourth week, when you don't take the pills, it's actually not a true period. It's actually called a withdrawal bleed. And this is because the pill blocks ovulation, so you don't actually have any progesterone building up. So when you bleed, it's basically your estrogen is just going up to a point and then your lining sheds. So that is not a true period. However, if you are on the hormonal IUD, you actually cycle, you have a natural cycle, but you don't bleed. So that's kind of the opposite. So depending on whatever, contraception you're on, you might or might not have a true period. So basically menstruation seems to occur at the end of the menstrual cycle, but it's actually the beginning. So only if you are getting pregnant and if you have a period, then that might seem like the end. But actually, when we're tracking our cycles, when you're putting it in your app, menstruation day one is actually day one of your cycle. So the day you start bleeding, not spotting, when you actually have a full on bleed. So I want to be also talking about not ovulating. So I said that, true menstruation only happens when you ovulate during the cycle. And I know for women with PCOS, we don't actually ovulate very much. So sometimes you ovulate and sometimes you don't. And so during those cycles when you don't ovulate, you don't actually have a true period. So it's the same thing basically, and that's called an anovulatory cycle. I could totally do another whole video on ovulation. So just take note of that, right? So a true period only happens when you ovulate, and depending on what birth control pill you're on, if you're on the IUD, yes, you get a period, but if you're on the pill, no, you don't actually get a period. So actually, why do we have a period? And I want to, quote to you this quote from Laura Briden. She is a women's health expert, and you can just go look her up. So she said that it's the cycle and hormones that are beneficial, not the bleed. The bleed is only an inevitable outcome of an anovulatory cycle because in general, it's not possible to ovulate but then not go on to have a bleed. So basically, that's what she's saying, right? Like when you ovulate, you have the hormones that are beneficial, like estrogen and progesterone. The bleed is just an inevitable outcome. So when we ovulate, we just have to bleed. But in general, it is not possible to like ovulate and then not have a bleed unless you're pregnant. You had a hysterectomy, which is basically removal of the uterus, or if you are on the hormonal IUD. So every month, our menstrual cycles, it runs like 26 to 35 days. Some of you might be longer, some of you might be shorter, but the average amount will be 26 to 35. So if you're not spot on at 28, it's fine. It's totally fine. If you have PCOS, I would say anything under 40 days is good. Okay, just we'll just say that because you know, I feel like PCOS women, we tend to stress about our periods and our menstrual cycles, and it's like, I feel like I can't get my cycles down, that sort of thing. So, it's totally fine. If it's under 40 days, you're good. So, when we talk about period blood, look at my scarf. So that's a dark red. And if it's a dark red color, it's usually just leftover blood that has been, left in the uterus. And when it's exposed to oxygen, it goes through oxidation. Yes, oxidation. And that's basically not really medically significant. If you have bright red, fresh blood coming out, which should flow quite smoothly and easily. That's really good. It means that both your estrogen and progesterone are being balanced. However, if you have, sort of like pink, light red blood, that could point to like anemia. For example, if you have low levels of iron, or you have an estrogen deficiency. So maybe you don't have enough estrogen being built up in the follicular part of your cycle, so like the front part of your cycle. And of course, if you have clotted on pasty blood, so some people have like clots, do take note that some clots are normal, so like, clots of like less than a quarter. But if you have clots that are like much bigger and it comes with painful periods, that could be a sign of endometriosis or uterine fibroids, so you really want to take note of that. Another thing is we want to talk about how long is a period, right? So a period can be like 5 to 7 days long, and if you bleed for more than 8 days, that is counted as a heavy flow. If your period is like just 2 days, that is counted as really short flow. So you really want to take note of actually how many days you're bleeding, not including spotting. So just be clear, day one is full bleed, not spotting. When we talk about flow of the period, heavy, light, so the normal amount that you bleed during your whole entire period is like 60 milliliters. And that's about like a shot glass and a half. So, if you want to know, like, oh, am I actually getting like a heavy flow or a regular flow? So one fully soaked like pad or a tampon typically holds about 5 milliliters of blood. So if you use more than 16 during the whole time of your period, that means your flow is actually heavier than normal. So you don't want to go above like 80 milliliters. That usually means that you are losing a lot of blood. It's counted as heavy flow, and you want to check your iron levels because you are going to lose a lot of like red blood cells, right? And chances are you might be really fatigued. So, during the period, the flow actually starts heavy and then it starts to taper off. And that's usually, the statistical average is like 5 days. So you start like heavy day one, day two, and you kind of taper off. And I want to just point to the last piece about periods is that our periods actually differ during different stages of life. So when we are in our teens, it's very common for our periods to be very erratic. It comes here, it comes another month, it lasts for a long time, it doesn't really last at all. This is because your body is kind of adjusting to that period. So if you have teenagers or anything, or if you know someone who's like really young, that is what it looks like. And it can look like PCOS, and it's unfortunate, like a lot of teens are being put on the pill because they go to the gynecologist and the pill is being prescribed because they think it's PCOS due to irregular periods, but actually it's not. It's just the body trying to adapt. So when we get to 20s and kind of 30s, this is basically when we're like starting to normalize, either normalize or maybe your period problems are getting worse. And this is because depending on your lifestyle or your diet factors, that's really going to either increase inflammation or decrease inflammation. So we really want to work around that. So I don't know about you, but for me, I got diagnosed with PCOS when I was in my late 20s, I think. Yeah, no, early 20s. And this was because I had a ton of sugar during my teens, and I basically did not take care of myself at all. So my skin was breaking out. I had a lot of acne. My period was like lasting a whole month, and that is basically what it was. And I went to the gynecologist. I got a diagnosis of PCOS. So whatever we did in our teens, unfortunately, it does affect our life in our 20s and our 30s. So depending on you, I don't know about your experience, but yeah, for some people, the period problems actually get worse. You get acne, you get, painful cramps. But for some other people, your periods actually tend to normalize. And the last piece is, after 30s, kind of past like the reproductive stages, maybe you don't want to have kids. If you enter your 40s, this is going to be the perimenopause stage. And perimenopause is basically when you have sort of shorter and lighter periods. Maybe your periods are missing, your menstrual cycle is shortening, and this is basically because you are starting to lose progesterone. And progesterone, instead of being produced in the ovaries, is now going to be produced in the adrenal glands. So when we hit perimenopause, you might be seeing like an ovulatory cycles when you don't ovulate or you don't have your periods. And this is also why it's also harder to get pregnant if you're like above 40, okay? And also periods may actually also be really heavy at this time, because when you have lower levels of progesterone relative to estrogen, that's going to really significantly increase the amount of blood that you are losing, and also possibly increase the amount of pain that you are having. So that is it for my live today. So I talked about, what an actual period is, how long it is, what kind of flow, what kind of color to look for. I'm really interested to know about your periods, or if you actually track your own periods, whether you're on the birth control pill or not. Just be clear that a true period only comes after ovulation. And if you feel like, why do we actually need a period? Yeah, that's basically an inevitable outcome, because you want the ovulation. You want progesterone, you want estrogens, benefits on your body, to, kind of like help bone loss. Yeah, it kind of helps bone health. It helps like reproductive health, and also like gut health, to be honest. So that's why we need a period. And also, if you have any questions about your own period, if you think like you have a heavy flow, or you can't really identify like the color of your blood, or you don't really know, comment below and I'll get back to you. Next week is Christmas, which is crazy, but I will still have a live next Wednesday. I haven't really thought about the topic yet, but it is going to probably center around ovulation, because that is a good follow-up to this. So thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions, just let me know, and I'll see you next week.